And welcome back. So we have our miniature completed. Now what I've done is I've actually attached him to a little clamp stand, which has been kindly donated by one of our mini fans. And I've actually gently removed the base, so we're going to do the base as a separate later. So what I might do is spray the base white, and then we'll use some contrast on that, because it's a very nice, simple set of textures on there. I think that'll come out quite nicely. So I'm going to set the base to one side for a moment and continue on via the miniature alone. Now, just move that out of the way for you. So what we're going to do with this one is some speed and contrast paints. Now, it's not a dirty word. Speed and contrast paints really have revolutionised the way that a lot of people can paint and get things to a very good tabletop standard very quickly. So what we're looking at today, we're going to do a very simple colour palette on our Stormcast Eternal. We've got a very simple speed paint, blue and a red, a rather nice bluish green we might experiment with, a brown, and also a metallic. These are somewhat new speed paint metallics. Work rather well. We're going to try those out as well. And we've got another selection of the Citadel contrast paints in various browns. As is predominantly gold, browns are going to work really rather well over that, give it a rather warm finish. So I think what we'll start with is our shoulder pads on him, and maybe detail on the shield. And we'll keep it a fairly straightforward, rather box arty style. So we're going to have blue effect on the shoulder pads, and we'll find some form of cloth for his tabard, and then we'll just shade the metallic gold armour, and that should do us nicely. So let's make a start on that in just a second. Right, let's begin with a little bit of blue. So as always, we've got our wet palette here. Not too untidy. I think we've got the remnants of our last project there. We're going to give the speed paint a good shake and just put a little squidge of it onto the wet palette where we can work it from. So dropper bottles, always quite nice to work with. They do tend to be quite an efficient way of doing things. And again, we're going to keep our brush fairly damp, not too much, because of course these are quite thin. If you look, they are quite a thin paint. But also, once you've got it on the wet palette, you can spread it out a bit and see what sort of blue it really is. Quite a nice sort of mid-blue, that. Blue, as it would. So let's load up quite a bit on the brush. You don't need to be too shy with it, but what we find is that the speed paint range is a little more watery or less viscous than the Citadel contrast range, so you probably don't need quite as much on the brush as you would with the contrast, which we might have a look at towards the end of this model. So let's load that up, and let's just do carefully around the shoulder pad. So let's just push it on there and see how it works with the gold as an undercoat. And as you see, you do need to sort of push it on, more like an ink than a paint. And as with all of them, it's run quite nicely along the shoulder pad and into the recesses, just to give it that shaded look. Again, any errors we can always tidy up a little later, so don't worry too much about those. In fact, what we'll do is make it easy. We'll go over some of the detail in the blue, and then we'll just pick it out later, maybe in a nice silver. So that's a first coat. What we might do is just do another coat of blue once that's dried, so that's going to give something for it to stick onto. So there we go, sort of bluey gold on the edges there. And we'll just push it around the edge of his shoulder pad as well. That's not too bad at all. Right, let's just keep that as neat as we can all the way around. I think for ease on this colour scheme, we'll probably keep the edges of the shoulder pad gold, so we'll probably just do that with a nice darker brown, just to bring out the gold highlights. Shield there, we can get some detail on that. Just push that all around. Again, we're going to go over the Thunderbolt and Hammer emblem, just to push all the detail, push all the blue detail in. And make sure we give that plenty of time to dry, as it is rather more watery paint than the Citadel contrast. The contrast ones will tend to dry fairly quickly, but again, just make sure that between each stage you get them as dry as possible. So it works very well for batch painting. If you've got a whole squad of these guys, and by the time you've done this stage on one miniature, then go to the next one and the next one. By the time you've got a squad of 5, for example, by the time you finish the last miniature, by the time you finish the last one, the first one's dry and ready for the next stage. And you can just batch paint like that. And I really find that with lots of the armies I churn out, that's a good way of getting things done. And before you know it, you've got an entire battle-ready tabletop force looking splendid and terrifying your opponent. Okay, that's fairly straightforward and easy, and we'll come back to that in a moment. Well, that's dried, and you know what? I'm not overly happy with the result, and that's fine. Remember, anytime you're doing a model, if you're not really happy with it, you can correct it. That's a little bit watery, that particular one, so we're going to go over that with a different paint. What we're going to use is we're going to go back to the Citadel range and go with a little contrast Leviathan blue. Now this should be a little bit more viscous, so it might stick and thicken on the surface a little bit more, and just give us a bit more of a colour. Now, as you see, that's gone through okay. You can still see the gold shining through, and we do want a bit of a sort of metallic look to it anyhow, but I think it'll just maybe look a bit better with this one. So we're going to give it a try, and remember, there's nothing wrong in having a try with something, or just swapping out and trying something different if whatever you used didn't go quite right. Let's have a go with this one. This was quite a thick one and quite dark as well. So I'm going to just mix a little water with this one on the wet palette, just to thin it through. Now it's a bit darker than the blue we used before, but as you can see already, it's a much thicker consistency. So I'm still going to water it a little. That's more like it. And we'll try that on the same areas. Obviously there's been some blue on them already, so this will help a little. Let's just carefully push that into all the recesses. As you see, straight away that's giving a much thicker and darker blue coverage. And actually, with the speed paint that's already there as almost a second undercoat, or a base coat to it, it's not that bad. So let's just push that round all the details. Again, anything that we go over, we can always neaten up either with a contrast paint or with a pure gold, which I think we've got spare ready to go. That's always a good thing. Push it round to the recesses and make sure just the edges there are done as well. It's better. Now we'll do the shield as well, because as you see, the shield, gravity was not our friend there, I don't think. So I think a lot of the ink, of the wateriness of the paint, fell down to the end and settled there. So let's use this thicker paint, really push it into the recesses, and then we'll maybe just dry brush over the top, or pick out the detail again with a gold. I think that'll be a nice simple effect on the shield. More water. That's a little better. There we go. Remember, you're sort of painting, but you're sort of pushing at the same time. Almost pushing the colour into the areas it needs to go, so that it sits in the recesses and stays off the raised areas. Or should we say stains the raised areas, maybe. Let's smooth it out a bit. Straight away that's already looking a little more like it. It's looking quite black, I think, on camera, but the blue really will come through, and hopefully do some pictures at the end. It is very dark, but that should work quite nicely. And again, we'll leave that to dry carefully, and then we'll do some more different stages, possibly next onto the tabard.